I'm Mark Reed Edwards, Chief Marketing Officer at HFS. Welcome to this HFS videocast of a discussion between Saurabh Gupta, HFS President of Research and Advisory Services, and two guests from EY, Sumit Dutta, Principal Partner and America's Co-Leader of Supply Chain and Operations, and Matthew Burton, Partner, Europe, the Middle East, India, and Africa Supply Chain and Operations. So let me hand it over to Saurabh to get things underway. Saurabh.
Thanks, Mark, and welcome, Matthew and Sumit. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here, and thanks for hosting us.
Yeah. So look, I think supply chain has become such a boardroom conversation. Everybody's a supply chain leader now, and everybody's a supply chain expert. And I think COVID shone the light on so many issues in supply chain that we've always been there, but now it has elevated to really C-level and boardroom conversation. So I just wanted to start and ask, perhaps Matthew, you can get us started on how did we get here, right? What happened and why and how did we get here?
And thank you for the invitation to talk to you today. So I think really there's a multitude of factors. So it used to be, supply chain events where, perhaps talk about them as black swan events. The Fukushima, reactor disaster, and there's all sorts of ones over the years. But then we got hit with COVID, and then just as we were coming out of that, we had the Evergreen ship kind of stuck in the Suez Canal. And then now, much more seriously, we've got the war in Ukraine, and really we've seen a sort of a real sort of pent up demand growing in the market, but then at the same time you've then got these kind of supply shocks that's kind of hitting all around the world, continued kind of rolling, COVID lockdowns, continued imbalance in the supply chain flows. Then you're also seeing kind of compounding this situation. A level of trade policy change that is seeking ostensibly to protect country supply chains from these shocks, whether that's the sort of America First policy, China One Roof, Made in India, whatever they are. You then got changes through the OECD, sort of tax harmonization, the client commitments and society demand around climate change. ESG sustainability. We've got much higher levels of omnichannel. It's persisted post-COVID. And so you've got all of these factors working together to cause disruption and change across the supply chain. And those imbalances are now leading to kind of inflation and supply shortage, which has firmly put supply chain as a boardroom topic and leading companies to have to fundamentally revisit how the supply chain is designed.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful, Matthew. There are so many of these challenges that have all come together for some form or fashion. We recently did a study of supply chain executives, and there were two things that came at the top there, Matthew and Sumit. One is transparency, and the second is resiliency. Right? These were the top two challenges. Or initiatives that all supply chain executives are sort of talking about. I just wanted to understand from a layman perspective, what do these really mean, first of all, and how can enterprises address this? Because they sound simple, but we've been dealing with supply chains for the last 50 years. Why are we still not resilient and transparent?
So let me take that one, and I think these are great questions. It's a great question in terms of what does it really mean? With so many buzzwords, what are clients doing, and what do they need to do, right? So I would say I think part of the reason why why these things have come to the fore, I think linking to the earlier question, like what Matt mentioned, I think all of these now are board level topics, and there is a board level ask right now on these themes, whether it's enterprise visibility, it's ESG, it's risk, is this whole bipolar world that Matt was referring to, right? And what do you do now with supply chain and so on? So I think What's changed, I would say, is these are questions that are now coming from the board down to the operating teams versus the supply chain planning manager, for example, surfacing an idea, right? I think that's one part of what's changed. I think second, I would say is I think there's a greater recognition, I would say, partly with boards, but also with management teams, that supply chain is actually almost like a new strategy. And again, it's part of answering your first question as well, right? But we do see these two themes coming in, and why this has now got even more focused. So I think that's one part. I think two, to your point about what does it really mean, I think transparency in this particular context, people want to make informed decisions and want to know hence exactly what exists in my supply chain where. And it's moving from Excel based and manual to a lot more technology based right now. And what does resiliency mean? It is to keep the supply chain functioning in the light of all those external shocks that Matt spoke about. And we are seeing, as we all know, right, the frequency and the intensity of all these external shocks are just going up, right? I've actually seen this data which shows like economic shocks. It used to happen every 20 years. Now we know it happens somewhere between 5 to 7 years. You look at the floodings that happened in Southeast Asia, the Japanese earthquake, we just seem to be beset with a lot more external shocks. So how do you keep the supply chain working, right? I think that's really what these two terms really mean. Now, what are clients doing? I would say three things. There is one, to get much more predictable in the supply chain. And this is technology-backed functional excellence on every part. How do I run my plans? How do I plan better, etc.? I think two, there's a big push towards using technology to get visibility and using that then to drive cross-functional processes. So enterprise control towers that many of us know about from clients, right? Connected to IoT devices down at at an individual equipment on the shop floor. I think all of that helps clients now get true on-ground visibility and then drive decision-making around that. And the last, I would say, is not just, I think all of this will get us operational transparency, operational resiliency. There's also a big push towards structural resiliency. And this is where clients are saying, do I need to redesign and re-architect my global supply chain so I can deal with these shocks structurally better, right? So hence getting much more predictable with technology-backed functional excellence, using technology, digital to drive these cross-functional collaboration for resiliency and structural changes. That's in summary what clients are actually doing right now.
Yeah, no, Sumit, that's fantastic. So you talked about predictability. How do we become more predictable? Digital transformation and also organizational structural changes. But what about mindset itself, right? I think that also needs to change. Look at the term supply chain itself. When I hear supply chain, the chain especially, doesn't it sort of imply constrained, linear, from input to output kind of a thinking? And I think we all know that we are moving towards more supply networks, right? Then we started to talk about circular supply chains, right? Maybe 5-10 years back. And now everybody's looking at how do these are really not chained processes. These are, interlinked almost like a network. Is there a mindset shift that we also need to think about beyond all the great points, Sumit, that you made around, how do we become more predictable? How do we leverage digital technologies? How do we make some structural changes?
I really think there is. I think you're absolutely right. The supply chain implies a sort of linear chain. A supply network would be more apt for today's world. Most companies, even where they have got, it is a chain sort of stretched around the world. Actually, there's a whole ecosystem of suppliers, contract manufacturers, own manufacturing facilities, companies they work, third parties they work with for logistics, and then their actual customers, and all sorts of different routes to market. There's been an absolute explosion in the kind of complexity with sort of the new channels, omnichannel, home delivery, etc. But it's not just in the actual physical network. You actually look at some of the process thinking as well. We've still got many companies, with a sort of monthly S&OP cycle that is sort of designed around batch process mentality. It's a step at a time. was designed before the desktop PC was even commonplace. And yet, with actual modern technology and modern thinking, you can do these operations much more concurrently. You look at customers at the other end; their view has changed dramatically. They were quite happy with delivery next week. Now it's kind of delivery in the next hour. So there's absolutely got to be a shift. They're thinking much more about this sort of network ecosystem, much more about kind of concurrent processing. Thinking of the idea of perhaps a value stream manager that looks across the end-to-end rather than individual silos. And so that mindset change has got to pervade the way we work. And the way we operate the supply chain as well needs to move. Probably the best analogy would be the way modern aircraft work. They're now so complex that you have these fly-by-wire systems so that they can trim the ailerons and adjust the flight. You still need a pilot to control them. And in fact, you'd be very, very thankful if you're on the plane that ended up in the Hudson Bay, because there was a pilot, but there was still fly-by-wire. And actually, the modern supply chain needs sophisticated systems. There's too many connections, too many different permutations going on for a person to manage it on a spreadsheet. And the sooner companies kind of get to grips with that and start to think about that kind of fly-by-wire operation and bring in sort of cognitive capabilities to support the decision making, the better off they will be.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And one of the big reasons for this ecosystem or the network mindset is also sustainability or ESG more broadly, because sustainability and supply chain are inseparable in my mind, at least today. And there's another study that we were doing, and this was with procurement professionals, and 90% of them said that sustainability is very important, it's right up there, etc., etc. But when we asked them, so are you going to lead it for your organization, that 90% dropped to 30, right? and we all know, sir, in surveys everybody wants to look good, so I suspect that 30 is probably even lower in reality. So why this dissonance, right? How do we get to solve or even attempt to solve some of these sustainability challenges? Because we can't just wait for this thing to happen, right? It's our planet, it's our Earth. What are you seeing on the field?
Absolutely, I'm happy to take that one, Saurabh. So you're right, by the way, in terms of the challenge that you just described, right? I mean, we are seeing that as EY with all of the clients that we're supporting, and we just concluded as well a global survey of practitioners and had a similar outcome like what you just described, right? So I would say 3 takeaways. I think exactly to your question, why do we see this challenge? We see this interesting thing where most organizations have declared a vision. There's a 2030 vision, but what's actually the big stumbling blocks that we can see is one, the portfolio of initiatives that exist today for organizations to execute on are just not backed with a kind of business case that would make it work with the board and others, right? So the ROI just doesn't exist, tangible, intangible, and so on. And 2, visibility is extremely poor on how am I actually doing. And like we all know, right, what doesn't get measured doesn't get done, and vice versa, right? So I think that's one part of what we realized was actually holding companies back, right? The lack of portfolio, lack of ROI-backed initiatives and visibility. In terms of what they can do to take it forward, what we are advising clients and what we are seeing the best companies are doing is, I would say, taking a much more expansive and a pragmatic near-term view to this. And what I mean by that is follows. I think number one, organizations are saying, listen, we just need to set, we need to get visibility first where we are. 2, set some real science-based targets. I think 3 is to move from just focused on cost optimization or resiliency to a lot more on intangibles. And this, I think, is a big unlock. How does this help my brand? How does this help my people in a very real way? 4, organizations are moving from looking at just procurement, which is where it started, to saying now this is an end-to-end topic, right? Which means how do I design my products? Where do I source from? Where do I sell? And so on and so forth, right? And then finally, to make the business cases work, there are tax incentives and so on, right? So do I leverage that? So I would say, in summary, organizations which are actually capturing all 5 of these are the ones which are really moving the needle forward.
So it's a balanced scorecard.
Correct. It's a balanced scorecard, a balanced portfolio of initiatives, and knowing how to, it's like the change management that you spoke about, right? How do we make sure the mindset change management is handled right from the working executive to the board level?
So given I have both you gentlemen here, Sumit, you lead North America, Matthew, you lead Europe, Africa, India, parts of Asia. What is EY doing, to help clients on this journey? Would love to hear, maybe an example that you feel could be a role model, right, for other companies to address this plethora of challenges that we are facing around supply chain. So would love to hear maybe one example, one from you, Matthew, one Sumit, also from a geographical perspective.
Matt, you want to start?
Yeah, okay. Let me. So I think a good example. Client we work with. So it's a major consumer goods company. And they recognized that the world was changing a lot, and their portfolio across Europe, highly complex, and so they asked us to come in and sort of do an outside-in review of their whole of their sort of European supply chain, and that was both looking at the sort of physical network, but also kind of how they operated. And the reason for asking us to look at with a sort of outside-in lens was to avoid getting stuck in the sort of current paradigms of how they operated. Really sort of challenge the status quo. And I think in taking that mindset and being open to challenge, we were able to help them find a different way of looking at their footprint, which products that they were outsourcing for production, what was in-house. And we reviewed the sort of portfolio, the bill of materials. We harmonized and simplified that. That then led to being able to kind of unlock opportunities in their footprint, challenge their sort of manufacturing efficiency, and by kind of creating a much more sort of concentrated network that then had ripple-on effects, because then you could make sure you were filling the vehicles that are moving from the factories to the markets, and thereby sort of reducing the sort of road miles. And so you had these sort of knock-on effects by taking this holistic look. Now, there's with all things like that, you could probably kind of sense in there that there was a factory that got closed, for example. But actually, rather than just looking at that, they looked at their business holistically, and they then took on the challenge. And this they did themselves. Of like, well, what else do we need to do? What else can we do? And so, rather than that just becoming a facility that got closed, that was then developed into a brand new state-of-the-art plastic recycling facility, creating new jobs and work and actually adding to their sustainability credentials. And so I think, when you look at these things in the round with fresh eyes and fresh lens, facing up to the challenges that we've been talking about all the way through this conversation, then there are some breakthroughs that can be made.
Maybe actually the same theme, and just to share a North America example and a personal client example, Sarah. A client I worked with extensively, again in the consumer space, they're food processing. And we've been through to what I was to one of your questions earlier, right, on supply chain transparency, resiliency, and so on, what an organization is doing. We've actually been working with them on all three, and this is what the client has been on. So I think there's stuff that they've done on predictability, on this whole cross-functional resiliency, and then on structure. The whole predictability side, a big push in their case, we diagnosed and they realized that it was primarily led from the plants, from the manufacturing side. So there's been a big effort to take almost 100 plants that they have at different scale and size across business divisions in North America. And what we are doing is bring our own manufacturing excellence capability. It's called IWS. We work with P&G. We bring their capabilities out to market. And we are helping the client in just revamping the quality of their manufacturing process excellence. And that is driving a whole bunch of predictability through the supply chain, right? So I think that's one part. It's a huge effort. I think the second one, in terms of using operations or using digital, we have worked with a client to create a roadmap and rolling out a whole digital factory, a digital manufacturing program, which, once again, given manufacturing is so centric, we have created like a manufacturing control tower, which is helping them have decisions and discussions across the function. At the same time, we've also worked with them on an autonomous planning, so to get much more streamlined in the agility of the planning process. And the third one, on the structure side, we work with the clients, and this actually was almost the step. We work with the clients to say, and the client led an effort to say, what is my right supply chain design? And design meant we started out with, what are the archetypes of products and customers that they actually work with? How do you best service them? And then you look at your entire portfolio of assets and almost take a clean sheet view. You say, I'm not encumbered by the current assets, but if I had to design my entire network from scratch, how do I do it? And that was almost the start of the exercise. And then it informed us what we needed to be predictable, and then our digital technology, right? Those are the kind of journeys that our clients are on, and where we are honored and lucky to be part of and enabling that whole transformation.
Yeah, I think I think those are great examples, Matthew and Sumit, and I think both of them, if there's one common theme that I saw, is this notion of being holistic, this notion of looking at end to end. Supply chain is one of the most siloed functions, right? There's planning, and there are 5 parts within planning, and there's manufacturing, and there are 20 parts within manufacturing, and so on and so forth. And I think what I took away from both of you is this concept of one supply chain, or what we at HFS call the one office, right? Wherein it doesn't matter whether you're front office, back office, middle office, whatever office, there's only one office that matters, and that's the office that caters to the customer, right? And I think if you can look at that holistically, that might give you some solutions. So look, my last question, I don't want to let both of you go away without asking this question, is, are we heading into a recession? Yes or no? And with so much doom and gloom out there, what's the one ray of light that you'll share with the enterprises?
I think that's a little flippantly, if we're not in recession, then we must be headed for one. But on a more serious note, I think we should let the economists determine whether or not we're going into recession. I think from a supply chain perspective, right now there are a lot of challenges to deal with, recession or no recession. There's still quite a lot of pent-up demand to work through, and I think there's still a lot to be optimistic about regarding supply chain.
Yeah, and I echo Matt. Yeah, so I think fully echo with Matt on the first. If I could predict a recession, I would probably be in a different profession. but that said, I think our role and what we have to help clients with is to be prepared for an eventuality. And the eventuality in this case, if it doesn't hit us, then we have to be prepared for growth. But in the eventuality of a recession, at least there are 3 things that we are working with clients on. One is to be much more agile or much more nimble from a cost front, right? Or lean on a cost front, sorry, right? And look at across the whole value chain, where can we see a rapid cost takeout, right? That will help us be much more margin efficient when we get in. I think this whole nimbleness and agility that organizations learned through COVID, making sure that's actually embedded in the organization's DNA in the working process, because that will help differentiate organizations in a recession versus their competitors. And I think the last one is prioritizing exactly where do you invest in capabilities, which is always a counterintuitive thing. But as we all know, right, best organizations actually invest in some through cycle capability during the worst of times. And even the COVID period showed us the whole digital divide that opened up between companies. So helping clients prioritize and figure out where to invest it's a capability, it's a digital, and so on, so that they'll be better post the cycle, post a recession if it happens. Those are the areas that we are working with clients on.
Yeah. So thanks for answering that very diplomatically and very eloquently, Sumit and Matthew. But look, this was a terrific conversation. So thanks again, both of you. I think if there are 2 or 3 takeaways that I have, one is that digital is now horizon 1. It's essential for survival. It's no longer some sci-fi that we can kick the can down the road for 2 or 3 years. It needs to be done now, today. I think what I also took away is this concept of the one office, or that holistic transformation where technology alone is not going to solve for everything. You need to look at your organization structure. You need to look at your talent pool. You need to look at the broad, overall supply chain. And then this third and probably very impactful was this discussion around, changing the mindset from linear constrained thinking to ecosystem. I think both of you actually mentioned this notion of profit with a purpose, especially as it comes to ESG. And that can only come in when organizations that are like-minded combine, join hands together to solve for common good. So, thanks a lot for taking out the time. This was very, very useful. Back to you, Mark.
Yeah, thanks very much, Saurabh, Sumit, and Matthew. Great discussion. To learn more about HFS, head over to hfsresearch.com, where you can view most of our research for free. Plus, we have a growing library of videocasts just like this one that you can take with you wherever you go. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next HFS videocast.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Saurabh. Pleasure being here with you, and a great conversation. Thanks once again.